Sounds good. All right, so we are now recording. But yeah, it's a weird kind of drawings for sign language class. By the way, sign language class, we have that 4 o'clock on Sundays, and that's going to be for the next 5 or 6 weeks or so. We're going to go basically up until workshop. So sign language class, adult class is in here. Kids class is going to be basically directly opposite. So, you know, the kids are welcome to come as well, and I'm teaching the kids some science and stuff. So that way, when we have 150 people come here who are deaf, that hopefully we can communicate a little bit better. And we'll probably do what we did last time around. And I don't know if y'all remember, we put some posters up that are labeled Deaf 258, and it's a bad pun. It's a so the sign, they say, so 2, right? Very, and then 5. They say like this, 5 and then 8. So this is 5 and 8, 258. So very interesting. It's not really how you sign interesting, but it's close enough that it, so it's just kind of a deaf pun. So it's a knee slapper. It's a knee slapper. But we'll probably hang those up around here, so that way you can kind of get some ideas and be like, well, these people act differently than I would expect. Well, yeah, it's a very different culture, so you can kind of see some of the things there. And so if you're interested in it, it would be really good to be here at 4, and then bring the kiddos, and I'll wrangle them and teach them a few signs, help them get some name signs and learn some signs for animals and different stuff that we'll just run with their interests mainly, rather than trying to have a real curriculum as to the grammar and syntax of American Sign Language. I don't think that's the best way to go about it. Anyway, so we are in James chapter 5 this morning, and I don't have my book out. All right, James chapter 5. I'll start off reading a few verses, and then we'll just go around the circle this way, and everybody can read a little bit. Actually, since I'm on the microphone, I guess I will just read through James chapter 5. We might figure out something better to do in the future, but for right now, I guess I'll just read through it. So, James chapter 5, starting in verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived in luxury, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruits of the earth, being patient about it until he receives the early and late rains. Also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any oath, but let your yes be yes and no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him in oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The prayer of the righteous person has great power as it is working. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and heaven gave him rain, and earth bore its fruit. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings a sinner back from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. Okay, so that's James chapter 5, and we are on page 20. There we go. Oh, okay. I mark things differently in like every single chapter of this book, so I always have to look back at it and go, wait, well, how did I do here? Okay, so what do we see right here in James chapter 5? Possibly in your own words.
No. Don't have the longing to be rich because it's all going to go away someday.
Right. So there are pitfalls and stuff with being rich, right? So what are those? Yeah, right. So as he says in verse 5, right? You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. So even though they're rich, what is it that they've corrupted? Their heart, right? And so the life that they have. Yeah, I don't know if y'all have noticed how many times that has fallen out on me, but it's been like half a dozen already, so we're just done with it at this point, you know? So, yeah. I could have just knocked it right out of the room, but that would have been off the camera at least, right? You know? Anyway, okay, so self-indulgent, you've fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter, right? So some of the things that I've done right here, it says your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you. Let's see. Okay. Good. They're just letting me know about my granddad. He's good. And you have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the laborers who mowed your fields that you kept back by fraud are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ear of the Lord of hosts. So if we were to think about who is rich, right? You know, who is rich in today's world? Who do we think about? Donald Trump, rich guy, very rich guy. You know, who else? Warren Buffett, you know, very, very rich guy. Bill Gates, yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Bill Gates has like I want to say his, yeah, all the people that paid their kids' way in college, right? You know, all those people. So you have all these people that we think of as being rich and obviously having lived in a life of luxury, right? So I would say sometimes we try to think about rich in a comparative sense, right? Kind of like what we've talked about with sin before, right? Well, my sin isn't as bad as theirs, right? So they're a worse sinner than I am because, you know, mine's not as bad. When we think about riches, you know, we think about living in the life of luxury.
How much stuff you got?
Yeah, I would say this. I need to say the correct name. I'm on camera. What's the lady? Tidying up lady. What's her real name? There you go. Yeah, I like Marie Kondo. We have, you know, thrown out a garage full of stuff essentially, and we still have more stuff that we're getting. Yeah, exactly. You know, and you know, some days you pick up the dog in your hands and you're like, do you bring me joy, really? You know, last night when we got in at 11 o'clock at night, and then you started wanting Max. Do you bring me joy? Yeah. We'll wait till the morning. We'll decide then, right? But you know, so think about how much stuff that we have. That I've seen several articles talking about how a lot of thrift stores have experienced so much stuff has been coming to them, and a lot of it's good, but then a lot of it's just trash, right? They're like, well, we're not the trash people, right? You know, but a lot of it has been good stuff because people will just look at it and go, okay, this is good, money-wise, valuable perhaps, but it doesn't bring me joy, right? So we get rid of it. So we live in a country where that can occur, right? We have a lot of stuff, and we live a pretty luxurious life, and so I think it's fair for us to ask ourselves, what are we doing, right? Are we living in the life of self-indulgence, or are we using what we have to help out others? you consider the context of the early church, right? Where did the early church typically meet? In someone's house, right? So the first century house, very different than what we consider as a house, right? Typically you have a, I want to ask you a technology question later, but I was thinking about trying to put something up here. But typically you have kind of a large rectangular house, and you go in, there's an atrium, there's a foyer, and there's this large courtyard area, typically with a cutout so that rainwater could come into this basin and stuff. And you have this large enough building that you could accommodate people coming there and spending basically the whole day. You have another further area, which would be your dining area typically, but you'd have this large area. So if there were not people who had these large households in the first century to accommodate the church, would that have made things more difficult for the church? Well, yeah. I mean, so people had nice things. How were they using them? Right? I think that's one thing we need to kind of consider ourselves. We have all this stuff. Okay, how am I using what I have and what God has given me? You know, I have this nice big house. Am I inviting people into my house, or is it just for me to enjoy myself? Right? And I think this is interesting, right? The wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, who you kept back by fraud. You know, there's all kinds of different ways that we can save a little bit off the top, right? You know, there might be ways that are you know, more acceptable, right? You know, than others. I deal with pay and billing every single day, right? It's one of my least favorite things to do, but you know, to keep a business going, you have to have money moving, paying the people who've done the work and receiving payment for the work, right? So I always have to go back and check, because there are several people who will come in and add 15 minutes here, you know, or 15 miles here, and I have to go, hold on a second, how many miles is that really, right? And kind of have to look at this and audit it and check, because it's very easy for us to see that and be like, well, you know, I mean, they're not really going to notice 15 minutes, right? You know, maybe these rich people who had others in their fields and were working were saying, well, you know, really, you only kind of worked this long, so I'll pay you this much for today, you know, after the work's been done. There's a lot of ways that can be done. There's a lot of ways that, you know, that is done, you know, in today's world. And so when we look at the rich, right, the rich people who need to weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon them, it explains essentially that it's not the fact that you have money that is going to condemn you for eternity. It is the way that you treated people and what you did with your money. And you think about us. I think a lot of times we will read verses like this about the people who are rich, and we'll think, well, yeah, I mean, Donald Trump needs to read this, right? You know, Bill Gates, you know, those people need to read this. What's that?
So we don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, Bill Gates is, I mean, man, I really have to catch myself when I'm being recorded. I feel like, you know, all this could be scrutinized, you know, some of my favorite phrases. But Bill Gates, you know, he does a lot of, he donates a lot to charity, you know, and he's created, you know, legitimately thousands and thousands of jobs. And I'm pretty sure all those families are pretty happy that dad has a job, mom has a job, right? So, I'm not trying to single out Bill Gates and be like he's a bad person, but when we read verses like that, that's what we think, right? Well, so-and-so, and we might even do a smaller circle, right? We might even be like, well, so-and-so, I know what kind of house they have. They need to read these verses, right? But it's not really necessarily, I mean, I think there does come a point where we need to go, okay, well, like how much luxury do I personally need, right? How much do I really need to get by? I don't think these verses are saying that you just everybody needs to scrape by and give 99% to other people, because you could probably build a lean-to out in the woods and live. I don't think that's what these verses are saying at all, right? But I think the point is, what are we doing with what God has blessed us with, right? Where does every good and perfect gift come from? Above, right? That's how James starts off his letter. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, right? And so he talks several times. He kind of circles back around to people who are rich, right? From the beginning of chapter 2. Beginning of chapter 2, where he talks about 2 verse 2, for if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, if you pay attention to the one who wears fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while to the poor man, you stand over there and sit at my feet, have you not made the distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? It's going to kind of come back to chapter 4. Is going to talk about worldliness, right? And a warning against worldliness, if we want to go with the title above it there. And so what he keeps coming back to is the attitude about what we do with what we have. And I think that's a very important lesson for us to consider. What are we doing with what we have? Because there's a lot of things that we can be doing, and it's very easy for us to just kind of get focused in on us, right? We live with us more than anybody else does, right? So it's easy for us to just kind of get that idea. I don't know, it's just singing to me. Verse 6, chapter 5, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. I think this is really interesting because in the early church, I heard kind of a hubbub because somebody had said that Jesus was he was a revolutionary who tried to overthrow the Roman government and got killed for his trouble. And I was like, you may not believe in Jesus, but that's really not an option, right? That's not, we might be like, the grass is green or the grass is kind of brownish because it hasn't rained, but, the grass is not purple, right? Like that's not an option, right? It's just one of those things. I think about this. One of the main ways we know that that's not true is, what did Jesus' followers do after Jesus died, right? So Peter, right, tries to kill the high priest, cuts off the Malchus's ear. Jesus puts it back on, right? And after that, Jesus stops him, Okay, well then, what did his followers do after that? They grew, so presumably they were trying to overthrow the Roman government, and they just all forgot about that. The goal was to overthrow the Romans, and then just collectively everybody went, do you remember that time when we tried to overthrow the Roman government? I know like there's no historical record of that or anything like that, but, do you remember that time? It's just one of those things you go, it's not one of those options. One of the proofs is that legitimately the Christians at the time were paying their taxes and obeying all the laws up until the moment they were murdered. Right? They were martyred for their belief in Christ, and they wouldn't defend themselves in that situation. Right? They wouldn't lie about who they were. That we have some writings of some Roman governors back and forth. They're like, do I really need to kill these people? They pay their taxes on time. They obey all the laws. The only thing they won't do is worship Caesar as a god. That's the only thing they won't do. And so there's this whole question, like, should we be persecuting the Christians? And to what extent and why? Because they're such good people and they're obeying all of our laws. Why do the central documents of Christianity, of our faith, tell us to obey the government, right? If Jesus is a revolutionary. Well, I think right here, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. It's the same kind of situation right here. The righteous person, the Christian, is not going to really even dwell on being wronged, right? So in this scenario, obviously we have those who are the laborers, and then you have the rich person. The rich person is wronging the laborers, right? Well, what does love do, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13?
Love conquers all.
Love conquers all. One of the first things, one of the things he says right before that is that love does not keep a record of wrongs, right? You know, we have love for other people. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to be willing to forgive, and we're not going to dwell on some of these things. And it's hard when money gets involved, right? But you have this right here: you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. I mean, how many of us would have that same attitude, right? How many of us would consider the same thing? Any thoughts or comments on that section before we move on?
Always, the backpack fraud. They would probably still have been filthy rich even if they had not been participating in some type of fraudulent act. It just
Right.
makes you go, you're already rich, and still yet you feel the need to do more.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes you go, really?
You couldn't use your money to help out others. Instead, you wanted to use your money in order to make more money for yourself, as opposed to, bring others up. You were fine with keeping others down, bringing yourself up even further, if that's possible. Yeah, that's a good point. You can definitely see the attitude of these people. I think it's important how he ends this and transitions into verse 7. Be patient, therefore, right? What is it, therefore? Go back and read the previous verse, right? Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until he receives the early and late rains. It's funny because, a lot of people view the South as things move very slowly, right? People talk slowly, people move slowly, people make decisions slowly, It's kind of one of those things. This is a large part of why, right? There's a lot of very agrarian culture, and there's a lot of farming. Well, you think about farmers just have to be patient because you cannot make the crops grow any faster, right? Where you live determines how fast the crops grow. You can make them healthier and make a larger yield, perhaps, by how you take care of the earth and the land. I'm always impressed by what's his name? Our missionaries in Africa. Cannot remember his name, but yeah, there you go. Maynard, yeah, Maynard's, yeah. By how much he knows about farming and taking care of the earth, and is able to come in there and just be able to develop this huge farm that this village can live on, and it's impressive, all that knowledge there. But one thing he always says, it's going to take time, right? You can't raise cattle in a day, right? You can't get that done by tomorrow. You've got to care for the cattle over a long period of time before you can get more cattle. That's just the way it's going to work. And so being patient like a farmer is something that is very difficult. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I was like, I don't think I could be a farmer because I'm like, okay, let's do this now. Let's go and let's do this now. I don't think I could be like just waiting that long. I would need small victories being able to, push me along the way. But in the Christian walk, we have to be patient because we never know when, our number is going to be called or when the day of judgment is going to come. But we know that if we are patient until the end, if we persevere until the end, then we do have a reward waiting for us. We just don't know what that day is. And so we need to, I think this is a really good analogy, at least for me. It puts in a great perspective. Think like a farmer, right? You're just waiting for your final harvest there. And then also, verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. So, what happens with a lot of the prophets?
Takes a long time for them to, what they've been told to come true.
Yeah.
Like Noah.
Yeah, Noah preaches for 130 years and saves his family, and that's all. You know, you have a lot of the prophets talking about things, and kings don't like it. You know, once you get later in time, the kings don't like what's being said, so we're just going to ignore you, right? And then those things come to pass. There's a lot of patience that these prophets have to have, right? So you look in the Old Testament, and we consider the ones blessed who remain steadfast and continue to preach God's word. I think that's the same kind of case now. It's hard, especially in America, to find people who are so receptive to the gospel that they are just ready day one. They hear the gospel, they go, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. I'm ready, let's go, right? That situation doesn't really occur very much, but a lot of people, you know, if we go, seems like a very successful preacher here. Well, I mean, how many years did they spend trying to teach other people before they started to see some of those results? How many years did they spend building relationships from the ground up and saying, okay, well, you know, we're laying a foundation here for the future, and I'm not giving up on you just because you told me no today, right? But that's hard, you know, because we want to, I have a checklist every day, right? I have, you know, my top things. These are the things that I have to make sure get done in order for this to be a successful day. And then I have, you know, a dozen or more other marks, and I check them off, or I put them on tomorrow or next week or something. I do that every single day. Well, we can't have another person and say, this person is going to be baptized today. That'll make it a successful day. Well, yes, but you can't decide for them, right? That is a successful day if you're able to baptize somebody, but it doesn't work like that. And I think a lot of times we don't have patience. You know, you look at, I kind of think about it like a lot of businesses. You know, like, man, they're an overnight success, you know? They worked day and night with nobody watching them for years, and then all of a sudden now they're an overnight success, right? Well, no, that's not how it works. You just weren't watching them, right? And I think that comes with the gospel as well, that, you know, a successful Christian life a lot of times happens away from, most time happens away from any praise or glory or anything like that. It's not something that the world is going to look on and cheer you on for, but it's something that we have to be able to have the patience to go through. Does that make sense? What do y'all think about that?
I think that's good. There's a book we and I've read, and you sure one here might have heard it. It's called When Helping Hurts. Who's the guy that wrote that book? I can't remember his name now. Anyway, if you haven't read it, you should read it. He talks about the focus of sometimes these like mission teams and groups try to go down in these places and looking to bring in a lot of people and save a lot of folks, you know, then and there within that week that they're down there.
Mm-hmm.
How you might be able to do that, but then it's unsuccessful in that these people end up falling away, and a lot of places have found a lot of, or have had a lot of good success when they go in. And one example we talked about, a family that moved into an inner city Chicago area and planted their home within it and ministered to these folks and built relationships. It took 5 years to kind of break into these people's hearts, and like they had a ton of success with this. And these people are so faithful and everything. And, you know, they live with these folks, and they suffer with these people. And so, getting to the point that you were talking about, like being patient and suffering. You know, I think you have to suffer with these people too for them to truly buy into kind of what you're giving them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful for us all to be more mission-minded and see all of us as missionaries wherever we are. You know, that's one thing I wish I'd taken more missions-focused classes. I have a book I'm almost done with here by a guy who's a missionary. He's a professor at Freed now, and so I ordered his book because he sat on my committee to grill me about questions and what was get my master's. Yeah, there you go. He was one of the guys on the committee there, and there's a really funny story about that I can say for later. But he talked about going to New Zealand and spending 7 years there and establishing a church that was, some 40 strong-ish or so. New Zealand's a developed nation, but it has very few churches there. I want to say he said for about 2 years that his, I just pulled it up here. I figure we could share it right afterwards. That sounds good. I'm always looking for good books and stuff.
It'll step on your toes.
Yeah.
I mean, it really will.
Especially if you've been part of mission work before.
Mm-hmm.
Michael can order you one real quick. We have one?
It's on Audible? That's perfect. I love Audible. I'm like a platinum member plus to Audible, I'm like, you want to buy 3 credits for a discounted price? Yes. But anyway, so this guy, Kevin Moore, so he's talking about that. I want to say he said for 2 years, it was him and his wife and his daughters. That was every Sunday, and so they spent that time reaching out and contacting people and developing relationships. And he said now there's a church that has, gone up and down, obviously, as people have moved in, moved away and stuff, but it's a fully sustaining church. So he moved down to another area, came back for a couple of years, and then went back for another 7 years. And the church there is just now coming back, because after he left, so many people moved away and were faithful Christians, but just in other areas. A couple of them moved to the same town, coincidentally, that they had established that first congregation in and stuff. But he talks about that, and he says, it can be tough, and it takes a long time to be able to bring people along. You are introducing, if you have not grown up in Christianity, right? If you have not grown up in this, you are introducing an entirely new worldview to a person and saying, please accept this and all of the tenets, right? That's a big ask, right? So we can be very short-sighted with that and go, well, why not, And if we just walk into somebody's life and that's where we lead off with, not saying that we don't, invite them and try to study with them and stuff, but if we don't have a real relationship with that person, like you're talking about, would you say yes?
Especially when it comes to like a lack of respect for what they already believe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, this is what I've got to tell you, and this is right, and everything you've known your entire life is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, they believe in what they believe just as strongly as you believe in what you believe. So there's kind of got to be a meeting of the minds there before you're ever going to.
You have to find a common ground, and I've had studies with people who have come and said, I want to study with you. Okay, sure, yeah, sounds good. But they are looking for the point where we're not agreeing on, right? It's like, no, buddy. What we need to do is we need to find something we agree on as a basis, and the why we agree on that. Okay, now let's move forward. And because if you come in there with a confrontational view, you need to change your life, right? I'm probably going to be rather confrontational back at you, right? So I think it's very important for us to really consider, some common ground with other people. And a lot of times that takes being involved with their lives. That's what Paul says that he did with the church in Thessalonica, that we were involved not only with the gospel, but in your very lives. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. He says we were like brothers, like mothers, like fathers. That's the relationship we had. And he was rather successful, right? But it was because we read, it's the same kind of thing. We read through the book of Acts. Well, the book of Acts is years, right? It takes us a couple hours to read through it, maybe. But it's years of time. And you go, well, he was so successful. Yes, because he developed relationships over years with people. And so that's one of the things we have to have. And patience is very difficult. Patience is very difficult, So what do they say? Ask for children, or ask for patience, you get children, right? You know, I guess you get more children, the more patience you need, right? You know, I guess that's how it works. But anyway.
Somewhere you just give up.
Yeah. At some point, is it really patience or is it just waiting out the clock? You know, like what qualifies as patience and what qualifies as just making it to bedtime? You know. Anyway, well, thank y'all. No class next week because we will be at Lads to Leaders, and so.